Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone, and it's a great pleasure to meet you again in Aix-en-Provence as we do every year. Welcome to this session called Deciding with the Stakeholders. It's true that you can't do anything in the world if you don't decide with the stakeholders. So we're going to ask our panelists the question. With the COVID-19 crisis, companies have undergone major changes and mutations, but they have new obligations. Management, workers, investors, shareholders, trade unions. How should we review the relationships between the various stakeholders? How can we distribute the work between the various stakeholders? In what proportion can economic actors make a decision together to maximize profit and get the best redistribution? How can we best decide including all the stakeholders in an uncertain environment? We'll talk about that with the participants. We have an English speaker on this panel, so if you don't speak English, I suggest you take a headset for translation. We have with us Oliver Wilde, President of AMRAE, Association for the Management of Risks and Insurance of Companies, with 1,500 members. They manage risk. And Oliver, you will tell us in what way managing risks is linked to our topic of deciding with stakeholders. Next to you, you have Laura Hartman from the General Labour Confederation in Sweden, one of the largest ones in Sweden, with the main Swedish trade unions. And traditionally, she is related to the Social Democrat Party in Sweden. Next to you, Lucie BASCH, chairman and founder of an app called Too Good To Go, which relates people, retailers who have goods that are unsold at the end of the day, and they relate them, put them in touch with consumers. You will be the Entrepreneur Women of the Year. You will tell us about how your app works and how you can link profitability and the search for less waste in order to protect the environment. Hippolyte MARQUETTY, a partner at Allen & Overy, a major lawyer's office. You work especially in criminal law of business. And you work on compliance programs to fight against corruption, money laundering, anti-terrorist fighting. We have with us Olivier PASTRE from the Cercle des Économistes. No longer need to introduce him. He will coordinate the session. And Olivier, you will start with a few words of introduction to present the discussion. There are 5 necessary transformations you will tell us. Well, thank you very much. First thing, I decided without Stephanie's agreement to change the title of the panel. Because decided with the stakeholders, I feel it's grotesque to talk about that. I think what we should say is to give priority to stakeholders. If you say deciding with the stakeholders, you get the impression they are the underdogs. So we will have a panel with no double Dutch, as they say. Every time someone speaks double Dutch, I will ring a bell. We're here to speak the truth and confront our ideas, and you can count on me to help you do so if you do not naturally tend to do so. We decided to look at the macro level and the micro level in order to make things easier, but everybody can reverse the 2 elements. So who are the stakeholders? Coming back to the topic. Stakeholders, or partie prenante in French, stakeholders in English. It's quite simple. We're talking about institutional investors like banks, insurances, pension funds, unions, obviously, and I would say first and foremost, associations Obviously, we have an eminent representative of these union associations, consumer associations, and suppliers as well. We discovered with the chips and the wheat crisis that suppliers are a major part. We talk when we talk about stakeholders, it's full liberalism. It means parties like someone who has a stake, and also parties in the full meaning of the word. So 5 major and necessary changes. If I look at the topic of these Rencontres d'Aix, transforming the world. Well, 5 transformations, 3 at macro level, economic level, 2 at the micro economic level. Macro level, first of all, you must give preference to the bottom-up approach, which is the reverse of what we've done for 40 years due to Keynes. Well, not everything should be thrown away in the top-down approach, but now we have to reverse this approach. And the base, so to say, must necessarily take power between inverted commas, because a top-down approach in a complex and globalized economy leads to a revenue, and this is not a good thing. We have changed our model. We have to live with Sully now, who invented the chicken on Sunday for everyone, for those of you who don't know. And the base must have at least 1 piece of meat a week if you want to have social cohesion. So no to Jupiter, yes to Sully and the intermediary bodies. Second transformation, we have to penalize short-termism. Obviously, we have to make short-term decision and take short-term action, but we have to stop the dictature of markets. The idea that companies should give a 15% return every year, quarter after quarter. Our friend who's an insurer will tell you it's stupid. Luckily, mutual insurances don't do that, but we have to stop having this weight over our heads, and we must penalize short-termism and short-term approaches. Obviously, as we see now, some people profit from the war, and this is not a good thing. Companies have to deliver profit that is at an absurd level at present. Third transformation, we have to condition any state intervention to the to a new start and a boost of the social ladder. There is no longer a social ladder. The great force of the 30 years after the war was the social ladder. The chairman of the Caisse d'Épargne started behind his desk in Sète. He started at the bottom of the ladder. This is no longer possible. The increase of the minimum salary is stupid, but returning hope to the youngsters is very clever. And there's still a lot to be done there. Participation, employee participation. Elizabeth told us about what she feels about that. It's a good thing. It has to be done quickly. We have to restore hope for the youth. So much for the macroeconomic level. For the microeconomic level, let's stop greenwashing in institutional investments. CSR, ISR. I'm not going to explain all these acronyms. They're impossible to understand. Very few people do this in a serious manner. Let's stop painting everything green. Let's get back to reality, really, and act. It's like a company with a mission. It's all very well. It means that companies' sole objective is no longer just profit, but let me remind you, I know that The chairman of Yves Rocher will kill me, but they still continue producing in Russia. Yves Rocher is supposed to be a company with a mission. If that is their mission, well, not so good. So let's stop this greenwashing at all costs. And one last point, I love you, you love me. Let's strengthen the power of unions. In Sweden, it's not perfect, but it's really good if you compare to France, where it's only 5% of people are unionized. We have fragmented unions that are not able to make proposals because they haven't got the means to do so. So they become more political and you can't discuss with them. This may be an exaggeration and a caricature, but you have to support the unions. I don't know, with an interaction with the wage earners or support from the state. I don't know. You have to support and strengthen these intermediaries between the workers and the company leaders, the management, and we'll see what we say in the last declaration of the Rencontres. But this panel is the most important of the Rencontres, as all the ones I take part. But because if we don't include these stakeholders, we won't make it. The state can't do it on its own. The consumer can't do it on its own. I take a shower and not a bath, but it's not going to change the planet. The state has to act, the intermediary bodies have to act, and the stakeholders have to take power, and we have to support them. Please don't speak double Dutch. Make proposals, real proposals. And at the end of the session, we'll have returned priority to the stakeholders, and we'll get rid of the present domination of the stakeholders, but stake being written S-T-E-A-K. Let's continue having stakeholders S-T-A-K-E. So, Stephanie, over to you. Well, you've put a lot of pressure on the panel. Olivier, while you're chairman of insurers. No, sorry, Oliver, not Olivier. Same word, same name. One is in French, the other in English. Okay, how does this risk management, which is your specialty as an insurance man, how has it changed to integrate all these stakeholders with other issues apart from profit, like CSR in companies, without this greenwashing, which is a challenge Olivier talked about? Yes, I represent risk managers and insurers. Being a risk manager is an absolute necessity to help companies be sustainable and responsible. And I'll tell you why. We have a tool that Elisabeth Borne mentioned yesterday, which is how can I anticipate risk and strengthen the resilience of my company when in crisis. But when you anticipate the risk, you anticipate opportunities as well. And this is very important because it helps us identify the challenges for the companies in the short, medium, and long term. Once this is said, and once I map the risks, I have to be ready to listen to people. In the beginning, we used to do this risk mapping with the internal stakeholders, like the executive committee, who would say, well, this is what can damage my strategic plan. Here are the objectives, more than financial objectives. And now people are expected to have a plural performance. They must perform at society level, at company level, for the workers, etc., more than at financial level. And for this, I have to extend the scope of my risk mapping to take into account all the stakeholders, i.e., I no longer discuss just with the human resources manager about talent recruitment and retention, but I have to talk with the wage earners, with the workers. I have to go and look for external stakeholders from the company. And this is the main change. And how did this What did this bring about? Well, we made a small survey in our association to prepare for this rencontre, and so that we wouldn't speak double Dutch. And we asked the risk managers, and 40% of the companies that were consulted have a stakeholder committee. They have organized a committee within the company that integrates internal and outside stakeholders to really face the challenges of the company. It is not greenwashing, it's an integrated and streamlined approach. And we see how the risk mapping has started. We've seen that through the resilience of companies when faced with a crisis. Those who have really mapped their risk properly have resisted better to stress and risk. If you look at the risk of a pandemic, for example, even if it hadn't been identified as such in the risk mapping, the supply issue, the talent retention, all this has been mapped. There is a problem to retain talents, and if you do a proper risk analysis, you see that the recruitment expectations are different from one country to the other. In Europe, for example, we were talking about that earlier, you have to give a meaning to the job if you want to attract youngsters in a company, otherwise you won't attract them. In the US, they haven't got the same consciousness or awareness. So you have to adapt to the location and to the expectations of the various stakeholders who are your clients, your investors, your workers. And there's the thing that is represented by the stakeholder NGO, which is the planet, the climate. So you have to integrate the stakeholders, and in this way you can direct and improve the compass that you need to improve the strategy of the company. And if you do so, you're much more desirable for the stakeholders. Laura Hartman, Sweden is a country of co-management where unions are extremely powerful. You're at the head of the Confederation, which is one of the most powerful in Sweden. It's a culture because 80% of the wage earners in Sweden are a member of a union versus 10% in France. Do you think it's the best way of taking into account stakeholders to associate unions to all the decisions?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Bonjour. That is basically the only thing I can in French, so let me speak English. Yes, as a chief economist at the Confederation for Swedish Labour Market or trade unions, my predecessors have actually been a part of developing this, what we call Swedish model. You ask my Finnish colleagues, they would probably call it the Nordic model, which I truly believe, and I like to argue that it has many of the keys to the challenges that we meet today with the green transition, and let me describe why. I mean, the Swedish model basically relies on 4 pillars. First, strong unions, as you said, 70% union density, a high degree of collective bargaining. Second, a wage policy based on solidarity, meaning that the wages are set in collective bargaining not based on the individual firm's profitability, but rather on the productivity in the economy at large. And third, which is very important, a security in transition. In order to create acceptance for this model there, where we basically let firms that are not profitable die in order to move labor from these dying industries and firms into rising industry and firms. You need, of course, security in the transition. That means active labor market policies, education, training, but also a good insurance, unemployment insurance, and so on. And fourth pillar is, of course, the public education system and tax-financed welfare system. And all this together, they are mutually dependent, and they create a competitiveness, create growth, and also a very low degree of inequality, even though that can be discussed. There are challenges in Sweden as well. But then I would like to add why I argue that this is good for for this situation with the green transition, I think one thing that we indeed have heard at this conference, we've heard about the yellow vests. I know you French are very, very familiar to that problem. We are discussing that in Sweden as well. What we need is acceptance. On one hand, of course, we need to make sure that the green transition happens in the industries, and there the states and the public do play a role with regulation and some making investments possible. But I think the most important thing is to really make sure that there's an acceptance in the whole country. And to me, the answer lies very much in the Swedish model. We have to make sure that people feel safe, secure today. Elections in Western countries, many Western countries have shown fear, insecurity, and anger instead of security. So really enhancing this kind of model, but you must remember, you must think it as a complete, mutually independent part. You can't just pick one of them and then believe that the rest is gonna go well, but you really have to think the whole system.
Voilà, on va voir si ça pourrait s'appliquer en France. Hein.
Well, we'll see if that works for France. Lucie BASCH, your app, Too Good To Go. Just one word, says Olivier PASTRE, which shows that a paradise may exist. Yes, says Stephanie, paradise, yes, but you have challenges in Sweden because some liberal reforms were introduced and go against this model, but you'll tell us more later on. Lucie BASCH, your app, Too Good To Go, it's 6 years old. Tell us how it works. 60 million consumers. You touch 60 million people, 15 countries, including the US and Canada. 1,300 workers, quite a lot of retailers. Tell us how you can have a profitable economic model while your objective is to limit waste. Well, thank you and good morning. We started from an idea. I don't know if you know the share of food that is wasted in the world today. Today, we throw away 40% of what is produced on the planet. I learned about that when I was working for Nestlé in production. It was like a shock. I realized that our feeding model today, with the way we feed ourselves in daily life, was obsolete. So we launched Too Good To Go, which is a simple idea. I hear a lot of people saying, I had thought about that as well. So, which shows that it's not only important to have an idea, but you have to implement it. So we launched Too Good To Go, a mobile app which connects retailers who have unsold goods at the end of the day, and you and I, who come at the end of the day to recover the goods. So the person pays very little to the app and recovers 3 times the value of what they would have paid. And they recover the good, and Too Good To Go takes €1 of what you pay to the app and pays the rest to the retailer, which means that you have a real win-win economic model. The retailer no longer throws anything away and recovers a little money, and the people pay less. And we were able to create a company with quite a lot of jobs in 17 countries, because we also have the US and China. So the idea is to see how you can build a company model which has an economic model that will have an impact which is win-win, including for the planet, because waste represents 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions, so we can have a huge impact on climate as well. One word, because unsold goods used to be given to associations. Are you competing with them? Well, when I say 40% of produced food is thrown away, there is wasted food for everyone, really. We developed within an existing ecosystem. There were quite a lot of people who were trying to fight this food waste, and the idea was to complete their action. What you have to know is that associations very often come over and take big stocks of food. They can't go to every baker's who has 3 sandwiches and 4 4 loaves of bread left at the end of the day, and the beneficiaries don't eat all the types of products. So we come after the associations for everything that hasn't been recovered, and we give it to beneficiaries that are in need. What we realized was Too Good To Go is that a lot of people are not beneficiaries of associations or donations, but they have trouble every month to get properly fed. So this is an example. We multiply their purchasing power by 3 because they can feed themselves via the app without going through the associations, which is difficult for them because going to the associations for food is a difficult approach and a difficult movement. And for you, the societal role of the company is something you had in mind after working for Nestlé? Yes, absolutely. I feel that companies are the most efficient vector to have an impact, really. And the idea is to put back money as a means and not as an end. And our role is to fight the food waste. But we need an economic model in a capitalistic world to have an impact, maximize this, and help a cause that is very dear to us. Our main measure of performance is the number of meals that are saved every day, and we save over 300,000 meals a day now with our app. Well done. Thank you. Hippolyte MARQUETTY, you're the lawyer in the panel. Can you pick up on what was said? Is there a change in paradigm? You have a number of clients. You try to align them with the new regulations. Are there good regulations that can include all the stakeholders? Well, I don't know if you should hate the word regulation. Coming back to what you were saying about speaking the truth, short-termism, bottom-up, greenwashing. I believe there's a virtue in regulations. As a lawyer, we advise a number of big corporations, and what we see in CSR is very often a transformation that is imposed, for example, because of the US and EU that are regulating everything with a taxonomy, classifying the bonds, for example, based on their sustainability, MiFID II, SFDR for financial markets. All these acronyms that no one understands, in fact. Yes, but things will be more and more regulated when you decide to have a financial product. Companies are obliged to publish their extra financial performance or non-financial performance, and it's going to get worse. I say get worse because I heard in other panels that a number of company managers were worried about the regulations. I think it's a good thing. I've only heard one word since the beginning of the Rencontres was the house is on fire, we have to find a solution. What I note is what we need, regulations and the means for the stakeholders like NGOs, unions, etc., to force a number of big corporations to change and to align, to comply. In France, you have a lot of actions that were launched against some CAC 40 companies, listed companies. There are a number of actions against criminal actions, for example, against DWS, the German asset manager. This was done in the US to quite an extent, but in France as well, we see quite a lot of actions and court actions and claims against major companies for putting Uyghur citizens at work or getting their supplies from suppliers who don't respect and comply with human rights. Well, there is no forbidding. It's not forbidden to use a product that has used the Uyghurs, for example. Then it's a choice that is made. There's nothing that is compulsory. Well, with these regulations, you're supposed to take care in your supply chain of what you do. And you make commitments, and if you don't comply with your commitments, you have a number of associations, NGOs or others that are working both in France and internationally with local victims and that present claims. More and more claims are presented. A lot of companies are under scrutiny to look at the contradiction with the principles that they boast and the reality. So there's more and more counterpoint, and I believe people don't realize how much in the next 10 years, just as we did for corruption and the need to risk map, to map the risk of corruption, we see that the stakeholders will take more and more importance.
How can we fight against short-term visions? Because as Hippolyte was saying, we need to be more vigilant. Companies should actually be more careful in terms of their subsidiaries, who they hire. How can we fight against short-term vision? Because we talk about regulations, but companies need to give quarterly reports. When they're listed on the stock market, it's even worse. Short-term vision seems to be omnipresent in such cases. Well, the risk mapping tool is not a short-term tool. We've talked about increasing regulations, those that have anticipated the increase of regulations, those that have initiated already initiatives with committees for strategic purposes. For instance, they have anticipated that. They have not only identified a reputation risk, because everything can be a reputation. It's not enough. It's not enough to have a reputation risk, no. So this is why risk mapping is actually perfect, because we can identify all the risks that could damage the reputation. Once you do this work, understanding these risks is also having the means to see where we can do something and have a longer term vision. This is why we have companies. It's actually companies that are pushed to have mission-driven companies. So that can be respected or not, that can be open to criticism, because actually we have boundaries for initiatives. Yes, we have limits, but with regulations, this is actually a virtuous circle, and everybody is embarked upon it, and we have to give constraints with that. This risk approach enables us not to suffer, not to be a victim of all this, and to seize opportunities that are present. The fact that you were referring to trade unions being politicized because they have no means to act, and this is why we have a balance of powers here. What we have now with the transformation of powers with the stakeholders, we need to have a debate. We need to strike a right balance. We do not need to have a balance of powers to crush a company. We're here to help the companies do better. And do we have a culture in France for this? I think so. There is a change happening. You were talking about the obsession of having a growth rate that would be in excess of 10%. All the other stakeholders don't care about it. It's only the shareholder that would push for this. And the shareholder needs to be happy. Yeah, but if we want the investment to be sustainable, we have to reduce the share of profit, and we have to reallocate the money. That means that we can refinance transformation for ecology. We can take care of our employees. We have to take into consideration all the stakeholders, and then the company will be there in the long term. We have old companies that have been there for 150 years, and they are actually changing their raison d'être to be sustainable for a further 150 years. We have to take into consideration all the stakeholders. And if you don't do that, in 10 years, you're challenged, and you would be so already now. Would you like to say something? Yes, Hippolyte, I love you. But obviously, I don't agree with you. I'm not saying that I'm against regulations, but rather I'm against stupid regulations. And I'm going to take one example. In terms of risk measurements, insurers are prohibited from buying long-term, from doing private equity, and from buying capital investments. That's actually, and there are also some banks that are penalized, and they cannot finance TPEs. So this is actually a strong limit. We all want to be rich and in good health, but we have to make drastic measures and modify the regulations that are stupid. And there's actually quite a long list. And I'm going to say that the ASEC, which you glorified, actually created a lot of problems, and this has created a scandal. Hippolyte, do you want to react on this? I totally agree with what you're saying. Stupid legislation should be repealed, but there are some of them that go in the right direction. And this is what is very important for me. If you today you want the large groups to participate in this effort, and in reality these are the ones that have a power to do something, to go in the right direction, we have to give them guidelines, we have to give them some grammar, some structure. And this is what has been done. And we need the stakeholders, the ones we're talking about, have means of action and control. In France, this is what's happening at Gosvarien, a state that can be a bit confrontational with the media, with a reputation damage, where these large corporations have no choice. They have to comply with regulations. And we have to go towards a situation that we hope would be better. So how about Sweden? We know that it was very much ahead of time. This co-management was actually a model. It has been challenged because there were liberal reforms with a privatization of the education system, which surprised me, I have to say. How about the public opinion in Sweden? Is it more ready to have an energy policy that would be more protective of the environment than would be the French public opinion? Was the citizen included in this to preserve the environment? What do you think about this?
An interesting example. I think the picture abroad still is that it's quite heavily regulated with high taxes, and that is actually not the case. And you mentioned the schooling sector. I think you have always you have to ask where the profits and private companies are suited and where not. And I would say from the Swedish experience, which actually is very much the public opinion in Sweden nowadays as well, that the decision to allow multinational companies, profit-seeking companies into the tax, finance, schooling sector was a quite lousy decision, and it has really contributed to the problems that we have in the educational system in Sweden today. Whereas when we go to the green transition, of course, that is mostly crucial that we provide people with right skills to be able to quickly go from job tasks or works that disappear to those who arise, so that we can live up in the sort of the basic idea that the Swedish unions as well as Swedish employers say is that we are not afraid of new technology, we are afraid of old technology, which is based on the principle that we protect the workers and not jobs. But I think that it really starts on the firm level and on the working place level. If you want to make the union stronger and get up in the density, you really must make sure that workers are included in decision making already in the companies. We have lots of examples, both good and bad, in Sweden, where the digitalization has gone very smoothly. If the stakeholders applying the new technology have been included in designing how it should be introduced in a firm level, whereas those more top-down policies where you just put that new technology into hands of the workers really don't work. This is sort of it is a macro level question of union density and so on, but in the end it's very a micro level question of how you manage, how you lead the companies and how you include the workers.
Lucie BASCH, peut-être que vous pouvez rebondir sur ce que vient de dire Laura HARTMAN. Alors vous avez organisé un pacte.
How about you? You have created a pact with the large distribution companies and the state, but since you're part of the digital companies, is there a way to organize companies in a different way to have employees participate? You have 1,300 employees. That's not the dimension of a CAC 40 listed company, but how do you make them participate in the decision-making process? That's actually a key subject. When you're smaller, everybody can say, but in 6 years, We went from a handful of employees to 1,300 employees, so it's become more complicated. We still want to empower, to give the keys to each and every one to make their own decisions on their sphere of influence. We have experts that are coordinated by a manager, but often experts are more relevant to make the decisions. And what is important for us is to define for each of them, for each of the 1,300 employees, to define their sphere of influence and to have some leeway to take their own decisions where they can. They have a framework and they know where they can navigate according to their expertise. And that allows us to go further. And we have no other choice anyway, because we actually have been a booming company. I don't want to be a bottleneck where all the companies have to go through the top management, because we can't move forward otherwise. It's very decentralized. It's as decentralized as possible. This is why we actually have so many employees, because we actually have some sectors which are actually managed as if they were individual, dissociated companies. It can be also a problem because we lose synergy opportunities that can be essential. And we actually are spending a lot of time to know what should be centralized and what should be decentralized. But the problem is that we're talking about food. What is more local than food? May it be in Portugal, in Sweden, or in the United States. So all the time we have to strike the right balance between what needs to be centralized and decentralized. So quickly, the mobile app enabled to actually deliver more than 300,000 meals a day, but it's actually just a drop in the ocean in terms of food safety. So we wondered, how can we move further in our impact? How can we include the stakeholders, the large distribution companies, the consumers, the state? And we found out that the consumption dates are a problem. They're responsible of 20% of food waste, because people don't see when we say a preference date to consume by, and when it's not valid anymore, when it won't be good anymore, a valid date by. So the first one is a matter of hygiene for fish, for actually meat. This is actually something that we should respect. And the other one is just a recommendation. It's the best before. This is what we say in English, best before. That just means actually that the taste and the smell will be better. And very often we have 3 months actually. And this is not known by most people. And this is why we have a lot of stakeholders from the food industry, from consumption associations, to try to have 10 commitments to reduce food waste. And we've worked on this for 6 months. We try to explain on the packaging what it means. After this date, we can actually check it out. You can taste it before throwing it away. And a lot of people actually rallied around this pact. And we're trying to submit it to the Minister of Agriculture and Food, and also to the energy transition, because we wanted it to officialize. We wanted to officialize it, and with the 2 ministers, but also with the president of the Food Association, we also made it official. And we want it to be a standard later on, so that all stakeholders, but private companies as well, can actually do something, build matter, to make sure that the public authorities can actually have the right regulations afterwards. And with this in mind, did we actually launch some programs like how can we build a town where we can have an anti-food waste program, and also at schools, because we want teachers to talk about food waste, because companies have an economic role, and we have to show that with these programs we can change the society. It's a bottom-up approach, Olivier, isn't it? I'm actually depressed. It doesn't happen often. Why? Well, it's so wonderful what you've done, that we shouldn't believe that the others are doing the same, actually. We often talk about greenwashing and so on. Yeah, we all agree. But that's a concrete example. And we're going to think, oh my God, she's wonderful. Her trick is great. Maybe people will follow you, but you're a huge minority, and you really have to have other people carried in your wake. How about Russia, maybe? The idea was to give priority to the impact, but also to be realistic. But also our mission is to inspire and to engage. We're not judging people. People who, like me, are very climate activists. Very often you judge and saying, oh my God, you're taking the plane. No, that's not what we want to do. What we want to inspire. You can go to Brittany with a train ticket instead of taking the plane. It's important. We just have to talk about it. And with small steps, then we can have actually a big leap forward. That's what we try to do. We need to, this is why I wanted to have a company. I didn't want to be an association. I believe in the fact that the company can rethink itself to generate impact in a more efficient way than any kind of other potential stakeholder. We don't have much more time. Hippolyte, maybe you want to react on this proposal? I have 2 children who are actually believing that they're always sick and they will definitely not eat a yogurt if the best buy date has elapsed. So I thank you for all what you're doing. We just have to open the yogurt and check it out before throwing it away. We just have 5 minutes late, so do you have anything to say? So how can we influence the stakeholders? Well, the first thing for me would be to find all the measures that would help us get out of a confrontational state. As was mentioned earlier, that's the Swedish model, actually, as Olivier was saying. And in his introduction, the funding of trade unions is very important. We should fund them, obviously. I was part to a suit, Sauvagnac, for instance, who wanted to fluidify the relationships with the trade unionists. And there was a conviction, and when everybody knew it, I think we should fund trade unions. I totally agree with this. There are a lot of things to do in terms of CSR. We should have people that should sit in CSR committees, but also on management boards. We should have more transparency, may it be for large companies, but also for small companies. We should go further than that in terms of manager remuneration. It should be indexed on the CSR objectives. It should be transparent. That should correspond to what the regulations expect. We should have actually have a better discussion with all the stakeholders. We have some time if you want to have a Q&A session. If you have any questions, we have 5 minutes left. I don't know. Is there any question in the back? Yeah, do you have a mic? And then on the front as well. Can you introduce yourself and ask your question? Hello, England Chenasso. I'm the institutional director of BAE. I would like to know how you structure the stakeholders, what the objectives are, and what are the measurements. We had an example yesterday with CMB that was explaining how can they talk about 6 stakeholders with 3 objectives per stakeholder, and that they were having KPIs for each measurement. Beyond this, what we're saying, and the importance of having stakeholders, how concretely are you going to do it? We know the structure, the legal structure of companies as they are, but beyond this, how would you actually have more stakeholders included concretely? Well, if you don't know how to do it, you can join my association. We are an association that actually is aimed at discussing on the good practices. But just to give you a few keys. First, I think we should map the stakeholders and identify who the stakeholders are, position them as regards to our business. That helps us actually have some introspection on the way our company is built, see who has influence on our work, to have the strategy of tomorrow. Once you have done that, we should include it in the identification of the stakes. That would be material. We should integrate it in the risk mapping elements so as to associate them to our strategic choices. Depending on our size, of course, it will change. If we're smaller, we can have a more regular discussion, but if we're a larger corporation, the risk mapping should be done once a year, once every 2 years, and it's then that we should integrate the stakes, the expectations of all the stakeholders. And once you make a decision, you should actually check out all the decisions, if they are valid, with our stakeholders, and have a strategy depending upon that. We should have a back and forth strategy, because when you're talking about KPIs, once you have fixed your objectives, we have to give a feedback, we have to give a report on this, because what we're creating is a matter of trust. We're trying to instill trust. We've talked about CSR capital, we talk about health capital, but now, okay, for environment, the environment as well, but now we also have a trust capital. We have to make sure that we preserve these relationships over the time and to have a constant dialogue with them. You have given the answer in your question. We have to measure, first of all, and then we have to track it. And there's also, maybe we need also a coercitive part, otherwise we won't make it. Medias are important also. They have an important role to play. They are playing a very important role in the conveyance of information or knowledge, and there's certainly a lot of progress to make on this. There's everywhere we have progress to make. Laura, you have the floor.
You can do it in many ways, of course, formal or informal. One way is including union members, or even, I know in Swedish hospitals sometimes they have patients representatives in the board of directors, so you really do it in a formalized way. But to me, this is very much a design method, you know, service design. I don't know how much you use it in French companies, but that is quite a big thing in Sweden, at least now, really putting the workers, the employees who meet the customers or clients or patients or whatever you call this person that is affected by what you do in your company, in your organization, and the patients, the clients, together, and giving them a task to really come up with the answers. How should the work be organized in order to create biggest value? And this, of course, requires really power and willingness from the highest leaders in the organization to listen and to be open to changing the way the work is organized and doing things in a different way. But so design method and of course boards are two key elements for me.
C'est vrai que c'est très différent en France. Alors on me dit que c'était.
That's very different. I was told that it was over. Well, sorry, we have no time for another question. Sorry, it's over. Just one thing. Congratulations to Stephanie, to all of you. We've actually said that short-term vision was no good. We've actually mentioned everything that we should have. We've done our job, so goodbye. That's good.